So she was
So they say the spirits of the
University. And
We're going to get started in just a few moments.
Okay.
I like writing.
And that was the Steve.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you all so much for coming to today's Brown Bag Lunch Lecture. I'm Jarrett, and I'm the curator here at the Amelia Island Museum of History. Now, before we get started today, I'd like to ask everyone please turn off or silence their cell phones so we can avoid any interruptions while our speaker's presenting. Before I turn it over to our speaker today, I have a few quick announcements about upcoming programs and events happening at the museum. Next week's Third on Third lecture will be the exhibit opening for our newest exhibit about the life and work of local photographer Steve Leinberg. We'll be joined by a panel of community members and friends of Steve, sharing their experiences of having their portraits taken by him and giving a sense of his artistic approach. After hearing from that panel, you'll have the chance to be the first guests to see the new exhibit, so mark your calendars now for next Friday, December 15th. Next month's Brown Bag Lunch will be presented by someone actually in this room, Dr. Bill Birdsong, who will be speaking about the Timucua Two-Spirits and gender presentation in Timucua society. This Brown Bag Lunch will be the first event in our one-year-long series celebrating Fernandina's 200th anniversary and exploring the last 5 centuries of history in the area. Join us on January 3rd for Dr. Birdsong's lecture and to learn more about the exciting events we have planned for 2024. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for this afternoon. Regina Phillips is the executive director of the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center in St. Augustine, which explores over 450 years of Black history in St. Augustine and St. Johns County. Since joining the museum, she's worked tirelessly to preserve and share that crucial history with her community, and today we're very lucky to have her share that history with ours. Without further delay, please welcome Ms. Regina Phillips.
Thank you. So, this is the Excelsior High School, which is the home of the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center. So, let me tell you how I got started in this project. One day, my husband, who's sitting over there, Floyd, invited me to come to the Lincolnville Museum because he had engaged himself in the board of directors for the museum. Well, I walked into the museum and I looked around and I was like, wow, this place needs help. I said it out loud. The rest is history. You know, it's like you speak it into existence. And that's what I did. So, help me, Jarrett, here. Did this one? Which one? Hang on. Just a second. There we go. So, this is a historic picture. Actually, it's a cover from a program. And I don't know if you can really see it in this. It's not a great picture. We don't have any great pictures of the original school. But it had clay barrel tile roof. It was a Mediterranean style building. It was built in 1901. It was designed by an architect that was very much involved in St. Augustine construction during that time. He also designed the Bridge Alliance, which if you've been to St. Augustine, you've been there, his name was Peter Heinrich. He designed our visitor center, which is still there today on San Marco Avenue. And he also designed structures on what used to be Florida Memorial Campus there in St. Augustine. But this is his original rendition without the bars, without, you know, the walkway, the ramps, and all those things. Jared, I need help. Okay. Sorry. Are you advancing or am I?
I'm advancing.
Okay, I'll let you know. So, prior to emancipation, there was no education of Black people, not just in St. Augustine, but in most places, especially in the South, but definitely not in St. Johns County. But post-emancipation, there were some church schools. There was a Freedman School that operated out of a building on Charlotte Street, which is also in our historic district downtown. And that school, for example, it educated children during the day and adults at night, so that, you know, all these generations of people were learning to read and write at the same time. So from up until 1900s, the other schools that became a part of the community was the St. Benedict de Moore Catholic School, and also we had the Cooper School, which was a Presbyterian operated school, which was across the street from what became the Excelsior. So it was just a St. Augustine public school that came to existence in 1901 at 102 Central Avenue, which is now Martin Luther King Avenue. So it started with, of course, first grades, and as in most places, they graduated, they got up to about the 8th grade. And then children would have to leave town and go outside of the county to get an education because there was no place for blacks in the county to get an education. And so that became an issue because not just from the standpoint of you have blacks that didn't have an opportunity for an education, but the community at large started to feel the void because a lot of times people would leave if their family could afford to send them out of state or out of the area to school, and they didn't come back. So by the mid 1920s, you're starting to get some industrialization going on with the airport, and so there was like need to have a school there to keep our students in town. You had this railroad that was there, and so you needed people to fill those jobs. So after many, many years of going back and forth to the school board, the people of Lincolnville and the other people of the community, they were able to raise a few dollars, and the school board said, okay, we'll build a school for you. So in 1924, they broke ground for the school. They scheduled it so that the school period ended and they didn't have to interrupt the children from their classes. And then they built the school, and then in 1925, the new classes came in. The building itself is it's a classic design from that period. It's a shell dash stucco design, which is made with coquina rock, which is quarried locally in St. Augustine. And then, of course, the Spanish barrel tile roof that was on the building was kind of typical of what St. Augustine was building in that period in time. So it was a state-of-the-art building. If I could go back, Jared, to that there we go. So if you look at this, it's a barrel tile roof. It's like all these architectural features were just very, it was a very upscale building for an African-American community in 1924. It was upscale for anybody in 1924. So this building became kind of like a model for what was built in the Lincolnville area at the time, because right next door, the next year, they built a nursing home, which was called the Buckingham Smith Nursing Home. Had similar kind of architectural design, even though it was a single-story building. So they became like the focal point of the community during that mid-20s period, and up until probably the late 50s, they were like, this standout in the community because they were these great structures. We can go forward. This is a little bit of the history of the Excelsior. I know you can't read that, but I just threw it in there because this is some of the earliest history that we have in our archives, mainly because the school board didn't really keep a lot of records of black schools back then. And so that's one of the sad parts about being involved in curation of a black school and the history of that school, is that you have to search high and low, and it's got to be from somebody that kept a program or something. And so you're going to see some of that as we go forward in our presentation. But in I want to say it was in 1990, or maybe 2000, even like 98 or 2000, that a class of the 1945 class, they put together a program, an anniversary program, and that class included a lot of people that were prominent in the community, like Mr. Otis Mason, who was the first black superintendent of schools, Mrs. Pemberton, who just passed away. You may have seen pictures of her if you've seen some of the iconic pictures of Dr. King in St. Augustine with the young girl standing next to Dr. King and he's embracing her. That's Lynette Pemberton. She just passed away a month ago. And so those are some of the people that were involved in that early class reunion from the class of St. Excelsior School. They didn't get the name of Excelsior School. I kind of skipped that in the previous slide. You don't have to go back. It was when it was opened, it was called the Colored and Graded School. Didn't even have a name. It was school number 2. So it was several years later before the people who were part of the Lincolnville community named it the Excelsior School, because they wanted that name, which represented excellence. So a little bit about Lincolnville, just to put the school into context, is that Lincolnville was a community, much like, here, we had a community here in Nassau County, but Lincolnville was one of those freedmen towns that came right after the Civil War, where people came back, soldiers, and they settled in home sites there in what used to be orange groves, orange plantations. And that land was platted out and then leased and then sold to black families coming back from the Civil War. And it became a major part of Reconstruction in St. Augustine. There's some awesome 150 plus year old oak trees that still line the streets of Lincolnville that were planted during that Reconstruction era by some of the Reconstruction politicians from that time period. And a lot of those soldiers, as I was telling Jared, they fought alongside a lot of the soldiers from right here in Nassau County, because Nassau, Duval, and St. Johns County, they were all, before there was a USCT, they were, they mustered out and they became a part of the South Carolina Volunteers, fighting for freedom for themselves and for their brethren. Some of them were not even enslaved. They were free black men who lived in St. Augustine, who also went off to fight in the Civil War before the Emancipation Proclamation was even signed. You can go forward, Jared. These are some of the principals from that school. And so most of these people have other schools today in St. Augustine named after them, with the exception of Mr. Reddick, who was the principal of at the time the school was built. Now, Mr. James Reddick, his wife, doesn't get the recognition. She really was the first black superintendent of schools, but it was a segregated school system, so they called her the superintendent of the secondary, the colored schools is what they were called at the time. And so we have information on her in our museum as well. But they all lived in the community. Mr. Richard Murray, who was the last principal there, they built the second black high school, which is R.J. Murray High School, which is now Murray Middle School, which is still in existence today. But he left from Excelsior and went to Murray, and they named the school after him when they built it, because they outgrew the Excelsior. And of course, Mr. Solomon Calhoun was a little later, and he was a teacher and a coach and a principal. And there's a huge community center in St. Augustine right now called the Solomon Calhoun Community Center. He is also been inducted into the Florida A&M University Sports Hall of Fame. So, he has his own right and a lot of different things that he accomplished while he was in St. Augustine as well. I told Jared I would talk to you today about historic preservation because, that's been the main thrust of what I've been involved in. I have worked in every aspect of the museum. I started telling you, I walked in and I said, this place needs help. I didn't know what kind of help it needed because I knew nothing about museums and I was not a historian. I come from a journalism background and then culinary, because food has always been my passion. You can tell, right? I like it. But it still is. But we started out, we say, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? So at the time I walked in, Mr. Mason that I mentioned, who had been superintendent of schools, he was chairperson, president for the board of directors for the Friends of Lincolnville. And, when Floyd got involved, after about 3 or 4 months, Mr. Mason, I guess, was waiting for somebody to come. And he goes, I think I'm going to retire in January. And we're going like, what? We just got here. This is like May or June. So by September, he's going like, yeah, I think I'm going to retire. So I guess he saw somebody that had a little bit of vision to make some things happen. But we were trying to, from my perspective, I was just a volunteer. I wasn't even on the board initially. I didn't have any desire to be on your board. I was just like, I would go to meetings and take notes for them because that's my journalism background and that's what I did. And I would type it out and share it with them when I came back to the meetings. Well, it came to be that after a while, you know, the board that was there, they said, you need to be a part of this board. So I became the board secretary because I guess they didn't know what else to do with me. So I became the board secretary, and shortly after Mr. Mason retired from the board and Floyd was installed as the president, Floyd came down with pneumonia. And from that point, it was just like, I think people kind of looked to me for what are we doing? Well, we had a plan. You know, we decided we were going to do one room at a time. We had no funding from any source. We didn't have any money to even apply for a grant because all the grants were matching grants at that point in time. There were no revenue streams. The museum wasn't open on a regular basis. We initiated something where the board members kept the museum open on like 4 days a week. I think Thursday through Saturday, or maybe it was, Wednesday through Saturday. It was, you know, so we would rotate, taking turns to go and keep the museum open. And then eventually, you know, we decided, okay, we need to have some fees coming in from somewhere because there's no money here other than, you know, the board members giving some funds. So we initiated a $5 admission fee. And, you know, you can't run anything off of $5. So we did find out about a few grants that did not require a match, some small grants. We got a grant from Florida Humanities that did require a match, but we were able to do that for our first kind of like program grant. And in that, the Florida Humanities did a walking tour map of Lincolnville. It was the first Black community walking tour map that Florida Humanities did. So I think that was like 2016 or early 17. And so they gave us a $10,000 grant, and we did a series of programs that was called From Emancipation to Civil Rights. And it was a 4-part series that we did, you know, over a period of the year. We had different speakers that come in. We did a recreation program, and that was the first grant that we got. I'm telling you this because grants became our toolbox for how we survived, okay? And then the other thing that helped us was community support. But we're still struggling because there's no, like, you know, $10,000 is not going to do it. We still had no staff. We had, you know, we're struggling to keep things going. And you're talking about a building that's 18,000 square feet. And the unfortunate part that a lot of people don't understand is whenever the first lease was let for the building that's owned by the state of Florida, it was an as-is lease. Anybody know what as-is is? Like, what you got is what you get. And so I think initially there have been some funds that were set aside for some of the initial renovations of the building, which have been used in a lot of different ways over the years. After it closed as a school in 1959 is when it closed as a school. It reverted to just being an elementary school. And then it was like our local, which now Florida Technical Institute was there for a couple of years while they were building their building. Then it became state offices. And so they had like county welfare and housing and other programs. And so when the state came in, they had put all these little petitions in and put, you know, wiring in for, you know, computer data lines, and it's all kinds of stuff. It's still in there. Some of it is still there. We haven't torn all of it out yet. But by the time it becomes the Lincolnville Museum, it has been the Excelsior Museum and Cultural Center, which was named after the school. And sometime between 2007, when that museum opened in there on the first floor with an exhibit that was called The Way We Were, which was just a photographic exhibit of people who had contributed from the community of things that they had in their personal possession. It was in this space that was downstairs in some showcases that had been handed down from a department store somewhere, and they were small, like 5x7 pictures, maybe a few 8x10s, but mainly small pictures. There was nothing on the wall. So when I walked in, I said, wow, this place needs help. I was not exaggerating. It was not a lie. You know, the stories were there, but you had to have somebody walking around with you telling you this is this and this is what this represents. You couldn't walk through it as you would a museum and, you know, as a self-guided tour. So we got lucky. We found out about an organization called the Florida African American Historic Preservation Network. And we joined the network. And out of the network, we went to some workshops. And in one of those workshops, we heard about the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I had never heard of IMLS before. And so they said, oh, you can write a grant for IMLS, and they can help you with capacity building. And, you know, they said, you can be the director, you know, Floyd can keep in his, you can just resign from the board, because we had nobody else. We reached out to other people. We tried to hire people, but we had no money to pay them, you know, literally. So, you know, how many people are going to work for free? We did have somebody that worked for free as a volunteer director for about 3 months, I would say. And we gave him gas money because he lived in Green Cove Springs, which is a little hike from St. Augustine. And he helped us quite a bit, but it wasn't enough. And so we wrote the grant. I wrote the grant. I had a little bit of prompting, some help from some people from what we call FOPIN, the network. And they got me to a point, and then they said, oh, you got this, you're on your own. Well, I had never written a grant of that magnitude. I wrote the grant for Florida Humanities, and I had adjusted a grant for our local TDC. Had nowhere close to that. They were just program grants. IMLS grant, I don't know how many pages it is, but have you ever written one?
Not as I know.
From the people that I know in the museum industry, it's one of the hardest grants to get. We got it the first time out, and we wrote a grant. It was like $258,000 grant, and it was a matching grant, so we had to pay a part, and they paid a part. The good part with IMLS, it doesn't have to be 50-50. You know, you can have $10 over the amount that is what, you know, their cutoff, and you just have to pay the $10 as long as you prove that you made your, well, $10 may be an exaggeration, but you get the point. It's like, so we were able to, all the board members, you know, we raised some money, we were able to hire an assistant director, and eventually we interviewed a whole lot of people. We had somebody that we thought was coming in that was a graduate student, and that person at the last minute backed out. So I was already the acting director, and they were like, well, why don't you do it? So I took this job at half of what a director would get. That hasn't changed that much. Anyway, so, I took the job, and so all the volunteer hours that I was putting in and the other board members, because they were still working, we were able to pledge that towards the other half of my salary, and IMLS accepted that. And it was wonderful that we were able to do that, because now I could hire other people to help, you know, professional people that we could pay. And so it was like, you know, 2 positions that was in there. One was a communications person, and one was assistant director. And so that was the first step. The good part was that you spend the money and then you ask for reimbursement. We have never taken a grant where you got the money up front, which I can say is an awesome thing to be able to look back at that and say that, because there are 2 ways that you can get paid out in a grant. You can get you can take the money, you know, as an accruement, and you know, document every dime that you spend, or you could spend it and document every dime that you spend and then ask for reimbursement, which, trust me, is a lot easier. And so that's what we've been able to do, and it has really helped us to build capacity. So that was the first major grant. We were able to write a press release, and it got us a lot of credit in the community. Oh, you got an IMLS grant, and people started coming to us to do programs and different things. And of course, we were continuing to do our TDC, which is our local tourism development grants, which, you know, every county has those. And we did those for programs. Our main program was our jazz program, which is a good fundraiser that we do every year in Lincolnville. And then we were also able to get, by being a part of the what we call FOPIN, Florida African American Historic Preservation Network, that it came with funds. We didn't even know that. It was like reimbursement for small items that you could buy, like, you know, a computer or printer paper or ink and things like that, that really help you to build capacity. Because when you get ready to buy a cartridge for a printer, it costs you about $100, you know, and that's just for the black one, not the color ones. And then we were able to hire interns with that, so that also helped us with capacity building. And then we also have, you know, over time been able to get a small grant from the National Endowment for Humanities. So now we've gotten our foot in the door to these national organizations that are recognizing what we're doing. But before we even got to all of those, the infrastructure was still crumbling. It was still falling apart. There were parts of the building I was afraid to even walk in, to be honest with you. And because they had started demolition in the early stages of the museum that were never completed. So there were wires hanging out of the ceiling. The fire marshal would not give us permission to operate in that part of the building because it was considered unsafe. So this is where we were like one room at a time. So I found out about a National Park Service infrastructure grant that was, they were giving up to $500,000 in a non-matching grant for African American history and culture. So I wrote that grant in solo, and it was probably the hardest grant, even harder to me than the IMLS grant. I was writing it on vacation. I was in New Mexico and in my friend's basement, and then the Wi-Fi kept going out and all kinds of weird things were happening, but I made it in time and we submitted it. So the day that I got the call from the National Park Service, it was on a Friday afternoon, and they said, Ms. Phillips, we just called to let you know that your grant has been approved for the full amount. And I screamed, you know, because now we're going to do something to this raggedy building. It's falling apart, that we have fallen in love with. And so I said, hold on, could you say that again? I got to put you on speaker and let my board members hear it. So we had a couple board members who were there volunteering. So, you know, she said it again. And then we got the grant. And then it was just like, okay, what's the next step? So it took us probably 3 years, to be honest with you, because in the middle of getting all the architectural renderings and all the other approval that we need, we got COVID that shut down everything. So we were doing that historic preservation of basically the exterior of the building, because the exterior was in such bad shape that the soffits had holes where any kind of rodent could have crawled up in there, and I think one did one day. Remember that? And, you know, died in the wall, which everybody knew after that something was in the building. And we had just a lot of issues with the windows and so forth. But that was the first phase of our historic preservation for this building. The next major grant that we got, that we're still operating under, that hasn't been done yet, is the Florida Department of State came out with a non-matching grant a couple years ago, application for African American museums. And I think what happened is the state of Florida had not appropriated the money that they got from COVID. And so they put it all in a pot of $33 million, and they said, okay, we're gonna make it available to African American museums to do historic preservation. Now, prior to that, we had been making appropriations to the legislature, and one year we got lucky and we were approved for $750,000. We were excited. It was in the newspaper. It was everywhere. Then it got to the governor's desk, and it got vetoed.
Yeah.
Because he took some of that money that was the legislature appropriated for us and a lot of other museums, and he gave it to some private institutions that happen to be African American, historically black colleges and universities. But you know, why he did that, you know, I don't want to get into the political part, but he took that money and gave some to universities that had not even applied for funds. So I think it was like $13 million that he gave to them collectively. So our project and a lot of other projects got squashed that year. And so that was very disappointing. So when we found out about this money that was in this pot, we were like, we're applying. And it was a $500,000 non-matching grant. But you could get up to $1 million if you raise $250,000. Now, the grant was due November 30th. And this was like October 1st, because, the notice came out very late. This is where Floyd comes in again. It's like, oh, we can raise that money. I'm like, are you crazy? That's less than 8 weeks, and we still have to write the grant. And so he believed it, and we were crazy enough to, believe it along with him. So, we wrote up a big thing that we put on our donor box page. We put it on our website. We called everybody we knew and asked for money. And the community came together, and the community surprised us because they saw the work that we had been doing, and that we were able to raise in cash and pledges $250,000 in an 8-week period. And so because of that, we have this $1 million grant from the Florida Department of State that we're still working on. We just got a new HVAC system on the first floor the week of Thanksgiving. We have a new elevator on order because ours is at least 50 years old. And we will get the new barrel roof return. And then we have a multifunction room that's going to get a lot of technical assistance and just some other like windows that have to be replaced and just a lot of things. Not too much cosmetic, but most of it is going to be technical, but it's going to make the building a lot more durable, hopefully for the next 100 years. So just to show you, when the building was built, you see that fire escape? This is one of the early classes from 1926, I think. Maybe it's 36. Yeah, I think it's about 1936. But the stairs to the upstairs, you had like a fire escape on the outside. I have not been able to find a picture for the interior of the building, but from everybody I talked to, like when you walk into the main part of the museum, there was a staircase that went up the middle of the building. Now, what we have now is 18,000 square feet. Go ahead, Jared, I'm sorry. This is a later class of the football team, and there's some people on this team that became a big part of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine. You can see also the structure is different. There were wooden windows. When the state came in, those were replaced. So we didn't have to go back to that original design, or it would probably cost us $10 million to go back to all of that stuff. There were wooden doors on the front with windows. So we tried to replicate what was there within the framework of what we have. So we have metal doors on the front, and we have metal clad windows on the front. So it's not a total historic restoration. It's a preservation, which is a big, big difference.
Yeah.
And this is from the class of 1945. Now, this man, the second from the left, sitting there in a white suit, his name is Rudolph Israel. He technically is responsible for us being involved in this museum because his second wife, Dorothy Israel, lives in St. Augustine. She's about 99. And she was on the board of the Friends of Lincolnville. And she's the one that got Floyd involved, who got me involved. And so Rudy, thank you. But Rudy went on, he became a journalist, and he got some medals in World War II, and well, not just after World War II, but we have a lot of his stuff in our archives as well. But he is one of those people that was instrumental in bringing her to St. Augustine, and she has become probably one of the most prolific Black females in St. Augustine, I would say. Everybody knows her, everybody loves her. She's still doing reenactments with Fort Mose. They just had a program this past week, the Women of Mose, and so she is, she's quite a lady. And she was on our board until last December. She opted out to go to emeritus status. So, but she has always been very supportive, very young, sharp thinker, and always trying to help us to do the next project. So, because of her husband Rudy, who brought her to St. Augustine in about 1978 or 79, I want to say. She's from New York originally. These are the kind of documents that we do have in the archives there. So we're getting ready to celebrate our 100th anniversary for the school. And so we're going to kick it off this coming June with some other programs that we'll be doing in St. Augustine related to the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement there. And so we plan to have like a year-long of activities for the June 24 up through May 2025 of programs related to Excelsior. And hopefully at the end of that program, we will have established some kind of endowment so that the school can go on and we don't have to keep working so hard and writing so many grants to make it happen. There's still a few graduates left from Excelsior, still in St. Augustine. Like I said, Ms. Pemberton just passed away. Mr. Mason and his wife both were students there. They were also teachers there at Excelsior, and there are quite a few people. Ms. Tyson, who was very significant in the local civil rights movement there in St. Augustine. This was the report card of Ms. Janie Price, who just passed away this past January. And so, but I love what it said. It said the progress of the child in school will depend very largely on the interest you manifest in his work and the cooperation with his teachers in all their efforts for the improvement of the school. Please carefully examine each item on this report. It will give you much information as to the progress of your child. If this report should fail to reach you shortly after each month, please ask for an explanation for the delay. No child can make satisfactory progress in school who does not attend regularly. We therefore urge you to see to it that your child does not miss a single day when it can be avoided. Excuses showing good cause for absence or tardiness must be sent to the teacher on the pupil's return to school. So it's like that was this relationship between the parents and the school and the students. So staying out of school was not really an option because it's a small community, so everybody knows everybody. But just when I reread that last week when I was looking at this again, we're like, you don't have that kind of attitude today of what you're asking the parents for their role in the education of their students. It's more like the parents are telling the teachers what to teach with, which is very different. Mm-hmm. So this is an old, you can see that Excelsior Colored High School, that was on everything. And we also have a large group of attendance records that we have in our archives from students who had those perfect attendance records. A lot of them is like we have the records for one whole family, and it must be like a dozen or more of them for almost every year that they got this perfect attendance. This was a graduating class, and I don't know what year this was, but you can see more like the windows. There was no air conditioning. Yeah. And, it's hot in St. Augustine. But most of this architecture, like the transom above the window, above the door is still there. The pilasters, the little roof above that is still there. So we want to just restore those features. The window that is there is, the springform window that's above this door. That's still there. So those are features we want to preserve. Go ahead. This is also, they used to have not just a graduation program, but they had a baccalaureate. They were still having that when I graduated from high school too. I don't know if they still do, but the baccalaureate is what we called it, but they had like a church service, like the Sunday before graduation. And so this was at St. Mary's Baptist Church, which was a church that is a very historic church in St. Augustine. It's also under historic preservation there. It's one of the churches where Dr. King was as well. One of the first leaders of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine was the pastor there, Reverend Thomas Wright, and he left, and later Dr. Robert Halen became the leader of the NAACP and the leader of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine, and he was there a lot longer, and he was the one that actually helped to bring Dr. King to St. Augustine. The president of Florida Memorial College is called Florida Normal and Collegiate Institute, which is now Florida Memorial in Miami, used to be in St. Augustine. So their Mr. Puller, Dr. Puller, who was the Dean of Theology, was their commencement speaker. So that school left St. Augustine in 1968, and Flagler College came online in 1968. So there's a lot of history, you know, that it was the first institution of higher education in St. Augustine, but the people who were part of the city commission at the time that they were applying for, to purchase land didn't really want this black college in downtown St. Augustine. So the other part of part of the reasons why they left, that there was no city water or sewer. It's 5 miles from downtown St. Augustine, but those city utilities never went to Florida Memorial, and that whole community of West Augustine was also left out in the process. And they just got sewers. They've had running water, but they just got sewers maybe 10 years ago. And so it's been a struggle, and I think there's still some in the last 5 years that sections that just got city sewers. So it's there were people that made statements back when we first moved to St. Augustine in 1998 that it was kind of like going to a third world country, because all those utilities that make a community a safe place to live, they were not there. And I've even heard a sitting county commissioner, when people were complaining about the flooding, like on Rodriguez Street, which is one of the areas where there's a big church there, and the person said, I would rather, there was a debate between, do we build sewers or do we build a new library? She said, well, I'd rather see kids walk barefoot through the water and have a library to go to. Well, you know, that's easy to say if your child's not walking through standing water and getting rained on and stuff like that. So, you know, you have to find the right balance in things that you do and say publicly. But that was the kind of like the atmosphere of what people were dealing with in St. Augustine over time. And to some extent, some of it, most of it's gone, but there's still some pockets of things like that still happen, attitudes that still happen. So the school, it thrived for, you know, several decades. And then when they closed it after building Murray and the community kind of shifted and changed, they built elementary schools on the west side of town, the area that I was just talking about. And Lincolnville was, if you had like two parts of town, Lincolnville was the place where a lot of the faculty from Florida Memorial College lived there, so they were more prominent blacks that lived there. And then West Augustine was an area that was developed, and it was called College Park, and they had smaller houses on smaller lots and septic tanks and, you know, things like that. And so it became kind of like the people who lived in Lincolnville, a lot of them left after the college left and after desegregation. So Lincolnville goes down, the school doesn't have kids. This is a boarded up picture of the Excelsior School. And this is people who are left in the community who want to save it because they know the prominence that it's had in the community and in their lives. So they started to go into city commission meetings and school board and county commission because they didn't know who owns the structure at this point. So, you know, you have to sift through a lot of documents. You can go forward, Jared, but this is just examples of some of the things that they put out, you know, asking people to come to meetings to advocate for saving this building. And so there was rumor that the building was going to be torn down and turned into a pocket park. So people just came out and like, we're not going to stand for that. And, you know, you might have heard of a musician named Doug Karn. He was one of the people that was in the forefront of trying to make that happen. In 1991, the St. Augustine Preservation Board, Historic Preservation Board, they put in an application through the National Park Service to create this historic district, and the Excelsior was one of the anchors in that district. So it didn't get a designation, you know, individual designation at that time. We're still, that's in the works. We just are still waiting. It's still a process you got to go through. But this gives you all the features of the schools and all the buildings. I think it's like 200 structures that were in this report that was submitted, and in 1991 it became the Lincolnville Historic District. With the Lincolnville Historic District, of course, you have other things that happen, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But my time there is from 2016 until now, and in that time we've raised or invested about $2 million, a little bit more than that actually, in the structure itself. To date, we still don't have a guaranteed funding source other than earned income, and I can talk a little bit about that. It's like we do charge a small entry fee, we have a small gift shop, we have membership, we have we rent out parking spaces, and what else do we do? We get people just give us donations. We have a brick paver program. So we've just tried to create ways to earn funds to help the museum get to where it's self-sustaining. Of course, we have programs like this weekend. We're having our holiday gala. We call it our soiree. We have it once a year. And it doesn't raise a lot of funds, but it does help to match some of those grant funds that we need to match still. Go ahead, Jared. These are some of the organizations over time that we have gotten funding through. I mentioned the National Park Service and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We, in the last few years, our local TDC kind of restructured the way their grant program and is awarded. And they created a fund that's called a General Program Support Fund. And the Florida Department of State has also done the same thing, where it used to be you had to have a program that was funded. And now they've created this effort for small museums like what we have to be able to apply for funds based on overall program support. And you can still put any programs that you have. You have to, have a scope of work of what you're going to do. But part of it has to be for marketing because it comes from bed taxes. That's where those funds come from. And so it has to be to encourage other people to come to our county and participate. And same thing with the Department of State, encouraging people to come to Florida. But we also are able to do a little bit of our general support, like for administrative assistance kind of stuff, as well as exhibits and things like that we were able to get reimbursed for through those small funds. We'll move on. This is one example of that. This is the building. The picture on the right was taken when we first got the grant money from the not from Florida, but from the National Park Service. So we had two things happening, like big things at one time. We had just finished a TDC grant in the picture on the right at the lower end. Jared and I earlier were talking about some of the Richard Twine pictures. So we had this exhibit that we were able to take out everything in the museum and put in a whole new interpretation of our exhibits. That was in 2019. And so we got front page coverage of that. This is actually the inside page, but we had the front coverage saying, we got this big grant from the National Park Service to restore this building. And then we had our Lifeways exhibit that was coming. And so we were so excited because now we're getting coverage, we're gonna get some money, we're gonna move forward, we're gonna do all these things. Of course, we didn't know it was gonna take us 3 years to do that. The other thing that happened is we had a small organization, and this is just an example of how, I used to have a poster on my wall as a kid that says, "Big oaks from little acorns grow." Mm-hmm. So somebody donated us $5,000, and it was an organization that was kind of closing. It was a nonprofit that was closing, and they, divvied up the money through several other nonprofits, and we received $5,000. So Dr. Israel, that I mentioned earlier, was one of the people on that board of directors. And so we were trying to decide, what are we going to do with this? It's not enough to really do a whole lot. Well, so we decided to do an exhibit about women who made a difference. So then we got some more front page coverage, exhibit to feature women who made a difference. From that, we got another organization, Florida Blue Foundation, that saw that and they said, oh, we want to contribute to that. So they, in turn, helped to fund us being able to get a kiosk, a life-size kiosk that's an interactive, that we didn't do the, poster type exhibit, but we did an electronic kiosk exhibit, which we are adding to every year. So we're able to keep that going, and we're able to tell a lot more stories that way than just having, an exhibit that's on the wall. We still have artifacts in our archives, but we're able to make reproductions. We've got some oral history clips that are in there. We've got a lot of different things. We're able to do some ancestry research that we put in there, and just all kinds of documents, and people love it. The kids love it because they can go touch the screen and go to different stories. So it became a really good program, and we thought that we had a lot of money when we had $10,000 from Florida Blue and $5 from Florida Blue and $5 from the other, and we're going to do all of this. And I started looking at kiosks and looking at the programs that put them together, and the guy says, well, you need to go raise some funds. I'm like, what? So we have a volunteer on our in our museum organization that's been with me for now, ever since I've been there almost, and he is a graphic designer. So he sat down and figured out how to create pages to go in this kiosk that we were going to purchase. And that's the way we've done it. And so we've got somebody else to come and, do the sound bites and do all that. So it's just like volunteers are important to an organization because they bring talent with them, and we have been able to utilize that. I keep going back to walking in and not knowing what I was doing and saying, what can I do? And I think that, the answer is God has brought people into our path to help us to make it happen. So this is a part of what we've done. And all of these people now have passed away. But when we did this, 2 of them were still alive. 2 of them were still alive. And that was Ms. Vickers, who's still alive. She's 100. She turned 100 this past May. And then Miss Janie, who would be turning 100, I think she was 99 when she passed away. And then I also had the pleasure of meeting the lady at the top in the middle. Her name is Debbie McDade. She was a graduate. Well, she wasn't even a graduate. She left at 17. She left high school, go to New York to pursue her dreams as a singer, and made it and became friends with Louis Armstrong and his family. And then the lady at the bottom right is the mother of Otis Mason, who was a 2nd grade teacher. That was another one of those Richard Twine photos. He did a lot of portrait studio photography. And then the lady on the bottom right is Mrs. Twine, Mrs. Catherine Twine. And I think we discovered through research that Richard Twine might have been one of her husband's ancestors, relatives. Because she came from West Florida. She was not originally from St. Augustine. But she was known as the Rosa Parks of the South, the mother of the Civil Rights Movement. And so we were able to include a lot of information about her. And we've added some other women since this initial story that we did on that. This was a museum probably a few years ago. It doesn't look exactly like this now. But if you could look all the way through this case to this case back here, those were the kind of cases that were throughout the museum with the little tiny pictures that you had to do this to figure out what it was. And I have a volunteer here today who helped us to demolish some of those cases because it's really been a labor of love. But we've had a lot of different exhibits over the time. This is one of our prized possessions, which is the fingerprint card of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was in jail in St. Augustine. And so his arrest records that are a part of what we have in the museum. Go ahead. This is another item, one of the artifacts. This is a picture of it, but of the section of Woolworth counter that was used by the St. Augustine Four during the in 1963 they were arrested, and they spent 6 months in reformatory school, 4 of them, and they were like 16 students from Murray High School. They were kids, and 4 of them refused to sign a release or have their parents sign a release that the judge gave them as an option to get out of jail free card, and they said no, Mama, don't sign it. And so they went to like a reform school. 2 of them were males, 2 were females. There's 1 survivor that's still here with us today. And from her account, the ladies had to scrub the floors on their knees until they were bloody. But she still refused to allow her parents to sign it, because what they would have been doing is signing away their right to free speech. And the young men never talked about their experience, and we can only imagine how horrible it was for them as young boys during that time, the way they were treated. This was at the Woolworth Counter that's on King Street in St. Augustine, which is, I think now it's owned by Trinity Parish Church owns that building. And it used to be a bank. Wells Fargo was in there until a few years ago. And they had this piece of the replica that was used during the 450th anniversary for the city of St. Augustine from the Journey exhibit. And so the owner of the section of Woolworth Counter made it available to us. So now it's in our museum as part of our display. But it's an original section, still has the sink intact and everything behind there. Go ahead.
And we are coming up.
I know, they only got 2 more slides, I think. This is another thing that we did when we redid that exhibit, that we took elements from historic churches in the community. So each one of these banners, they have like a little bit of the history of the church and a little bit of their involvement in the civil rights movement. And this has become one of the favorite places for people. We also have video in that space because it's just a serene space that you can go and, just kind of meditate about what really happened during that time. And then this is another young man viewing part of our civil rights room exhibit, which we've taken those pictures that were little tiny pictures and we made like big pictures that are really easy to tell what was going on. And then this is from a statue we have that was from the 450th anniversary that was done by a local organization called Compassion in St. Augustine. They did 23 obelisks. That's taken off of the constitutional obelisk that's in our plaza, and they were different interpretations. This one is called Power Struggle. So when the kids come in, they really love it because they like, what is it? What does it mean? So then like, what do you think it means? And they give you all kinds of answers about it. And then we also do historical reenactments. This was a program that we did a few years back for the reading of the Emancipation, because Emancipation was a big part of what happened in St. Augustine and Nassau. And St. Augustine was one of the first places that it was read. So we did reenactment of that, but these are Buffalo Soldiers out of Central Florida that do reenactments all the time. And we do live jazz. And we also have educational programs, with speakers and stuff. So we're just trying to show you a little bit about what we do, what we have done. So, because preservation, you got to preserve the building and you got to preserve the culture and the history. And it's a twofold. And so it's like a balancing act all the time of trying to make those things happen. These are some of the programs that we've done over. Oh, did I do that? But some of the programs we've done over the years, this was a Make and Do Gullah Geechee exhibit. This was last year. This was also earlier this year. We do a history festival in St. Augustine. I think this year is slated for May 8th through the 12th or 13th. So there's like people all around town. We all come together and we do different things. And for our history festival, we just invite people to come. So you can go to our website and look for those kinds of things that are coming up. These are some of the other kinds of programs. Like I said, we do lab stuff. We also do Juneteenth. As of 2 years ago, we've been doing a Juneteenth program. This is from last year. We had Longinu Parsons, who is a Florida native, a Northeast Florida native, and then the young lady on the bottom who's Gullah Geechee culture out of Low Country in South Carolina. And so we had like a series of programs between documentary screenings and speakers and live performances and stuff, but always with that educational part that we bring into it. And I'm ending with this because this is kind of where we are now in terms of capacity building. That these are the grants that are helping us to keep going forward. That we have now that we're operating in part under Florida Arts and Culture, which is part of the Department of State, and our St. Johns County Tourism and Development Council, which is the Cultural Council manages those grants for them. And we have just gotten a new designation from the National Park Service that we are really proud about, that will help us hopefully in our future fundraising activities. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is a brand new thing that the National Park Service came out with, and we have just been designated as an African American Civil Rights Network member, and they're going to feature us in one of their upcoming newsletters. So we just got news about this like a few weeks ago, so we're really happy about that. No money, but it will help us get some money. And this is really our banner and ads that we do. The Road to Black History runs through Lincolnville. I know you've had lots of speakers that told you a lot of the history of St. Augustine and the early Black history, because I watched a few of them, and you know that the Road to Black History really does run through Lincolnville, through St. Augustine. We have the earliest Black history in this country, documented Black history in the country. And so the other thing that we're doing, that I'm personally involved in, is the Florida Black History Museum Task Force. And we think it should be in Northeast Florida because we have the oldest history. So I think that's the end of my presentation.